There's a moment when you realize that every person trying to control you is actually starving. They're standing there, demanding your emotional energy like beggars at a feast. And you suddenly see the pathetic truth. They need you more than you could ever need them. This isn't philosophy, this is survival. And once you understand the mechanics of this hunger, you become untouchable. The manipulator's greatest fear isn't your anger. It isn't your resistance, it's your indifference, because indifference is death to a parasite that feeds on emotional reactions. When you stop feeding them, they don't just lose control, they begin to starve. And a starving predator reveals its true nature very quickly. Most people spend their lives as unwitting hosts to emotional vampires. They react, they explain, they defend, they justify. Every reaction is a meal. Every emotional response is sustenance for someone who has learned to weaponize your humanity against you. But there's another way to live, a way that transforms you from prey into something far more dangerous. Someone who cannot be moved. The ancient principle is elegant in its brutality. Those who depend on others' reactions for their power are inherently weak. They've built their entire identity on a foundation that requires your participation. Remove your participation and watch their empire crumble. This isn't about becoming emotionless. This is about becoming selective with your emotional investments, strategic with your responses, surgical with your engagement. Consider the workplace manipulator who thrives on creating drama. They send passive-aggressive emails, make cutting remarks in meetings, orchestrate conflicts between colleagues. Their power comes from your reaction. When they say, "I'm just concerned about your performance lately, but maybe that's just me," the amateur responds with defensiveness. "What do you mean? My performance is fine. What specifically are you talking about?" The professional responds with calculated emptiness, interesting perspective. Then they continue with their work as if nothing was said. No explanation, no defense, no emotion. Just acknowledgement followed by dismissal through action. Watch what happens next. The manipulator, starved of the emotional meal they expected, will escalate. They'll try again with more direct aggression. "You seem to have an attitude problem." The amateur engages, "I don't have an attitude problem. You're the one being difficult." The professional responds, "I can see you feel strongly about this," and then returns to their task. Notice the psychological jujitsu. You've acknowledged their emotion without accepting their frame. You've remained untouchable while appearing reasonable to any observers. This is where Machiavelli's wisdom becomes surgical. Since love and fear can hardly exist together, if we must choose between them, it is far safer to be feared than loved. But fear doesn't come from aggression. Fear comes from unpredictability. And nothing is more unpredictable to a manipulator than someone who simply refuses to play their game. The digital realm amplifies these dynamics exponentially. Social media has become a feeding ground for emotional predators who craft posts designed to trigger responses. They share inflammatory opinions, post vague complaints, or make subtle attacks disguised as humor. Each comment, each reaction, each share feeds their need for significance. When someone posts, some people really need to learn basic respect, but I guess that's too much to ask these days. They're fishing for reactions. The amateur takes the bait. "Are you talking about me? What did I do wrong?" The strategic individual does something more devastating. Nothing. Complete radio silence. Not even a view of their story. But here's where it gets sophisticated. If direct confrontation becomes unavoidable, the response must be calibrated for maximum psychological impact with minimum emotional investment. When they finally message you directly, "You've been really distant lately. Did I do something wrong?" Your response, "Just focusing on other things." No explanation of what things. No reassurance about the relationship. No engagement with their emotional manipulation. Just a simple statement of fact that reveals nothing while acknowledging everything. The beauty of this approach is its psychological completeness. You haven't been cruel. You haven't been aggressive. You've simply become unavailable as a source of the emotional drama they require to feel significant. And unavailability to a person who depends on your reactions is more terrifying than any direct confrontation. In romantic relationships, this principle becomes even more powerful because the stakes feel higher. The manipulative partner uses emotions as weapons. You don't care about me anymore. You're being selfish. You've changed, and not in a good way. Each accusation is designed to provoke a specific response: guilt, explanation, desperate reassurance. When they say, "You don't love me like you used to," the amateur responds with panic, "That's not true. I do love you. What can I do to prove it?" This response hands them enormous power because it accepts their premise and puts you in the position of having to prove your worth. The strategic response: "I can understand why you might feel that way." Pause. Let it hang in the air. No reassurance, no desperate protestations of love, no acceptance of their frame, just acknowledgement of their emotional state without taking responsibility for it. Watch their confusion multiply. They were prepared for either fight or desperate reconciliation. They weren't prepared for calm acknowledgement followed by emotional neutrality. This forces them to either escalate dramatically, revealing their manipulative nature, or retreat and reconsider their approach. Machiavelli understood that everyone sees what you appear to be, few experience what you really are. The manipulator has built their strategy around the assumption that they know what you really are, someone who can be moved, controlled, and predicted. When you become strategically unknowable, their entire playbook becomes useless. But this transcends mere tactics. This is about fundamentally altering the power dynamics that govern human interaction. Most people operate from a position of reactive vulnerability. They allow others to set the emotional tone of every interaction. They accept other people's urgency as their own emergency. They treat other people's emotional states as their responsibility to manage. The shift happens when you realize that emotional availability is a privilege to be earned, not a right to be demanded. Your peace of mind is not a public resource. Your emotional energy is not a utility that others can access on demand. When someone attempts to create chaos in your emotional world, you have the absolute right to refuse participation. Here's where the philosophy becomes practical power. In a group setting where someone tries to publicly challenge your competence, the amateur responds with immediate defense. Actually, I do know what I'm talking about, because this response accepts their premise that your competence is up for debate and puts you in the position of having to prove yourself to them. The strategic response involves a pause, exactly 3 seconds of direct eye contact, followed by interesting point of view. Then you continue exactly where you left off before their interruption. No defense, no engagement with their challenge, just acknowledgement and dismissal through continued action. The psychological impact is devastating because you've demonstrated that their opinion carries no weight in your reality. You've shown that their attempt to establish dominance has failed so completely that it didn't even register as worthy of serious response. In front of witnesses, you've revealed them as someone whose challenges can be dismissed with politeness. This principle scales infinitely. When someone tries to guilt you into attending their event, "I guess you're too busy for family now," the amateur responds with explanation. "It's not that I'm too busy, it's just that." The strategic response: "I won't be able to make it." No explanation, no justification, no acceptance of their guilt manipulation, just a clear statement of fact. The deeper truth is that manipulation only works when both parties participate in the manipulation. It requires your emotional investment to function. Remove your investment, and the entire structure collapses. This isn't about becoming cold or cruel. This is about becoming strategically unavailable for other people's emotional manipulation. Machiavelli observed that he who neglects what is done for what ought to be done sooner effects his ruin than his preservation. Most people neglect what is actually happening, the attempted manipulation to focus on what ought to be happening. Honest, straightforward communication. This misplaced focus ensures their continued vulnerability. When you start responding to what is actually happening rather than what ought to be happening, you become dangerous to manipulators. You stop feeding their need for emotional reactions. You stop accepting responsibility for their emotional states. You stop treating their urgency as your emergency. In professional settings, this transformation is particularly powerful. When a colleague tries to create urgency around their poor planning, "This project is due tomorrow, and I just realized we need your input." The amateur responds with stress. "Oh no, I wish you had told me earlier, but let me see what I can do." This rewards their poor planning and establishes you as someone who will absorb the consequences of other people's failures. The strategic response. That sounds stressful for you. I'll be able to look at this next Tuesday. No apology for their poor planning. No acceptance of their artificial urgency. No absorption of stress that belongs to them. Just a clear boundary delivered with polite firmness. Watch them struggle with this response. They expected you to take responsibility for their problem. They counted on your fear of appearing uncooperative. They assumed you would prioritize their crisis over your own schedule. When none of these manipulations work, they're forced to either solve their own problem or reveal the manipulative nature of their request. The transformation becomes complete when you realize that other people's emotional states are information, not instructions. When someone is angry at you, that tells you something about them. Their expectations, their boundaries, their emotional management skills. It doesn't automatically create an obligation for you to change your behavior to manage their emotional state. This is where most people lose their way. They treat other people's emotions as commands rather than communications. Someone is disappointed in them, so they must change their behavior. Someone is angry at them, so they must apologize and modify their actions. Someone is sad about their choices, so they must reconsider their decisions. But emotions are not arguments. Someone's disappointment in your choice doesn't make your choice wrong. Someone's anger at your boundary doesn't make your boundary inappropriate. Someone's sadness about your decision doesn't make your decision cruel. Their emotions are valid as their experience, but they're not valid as your instructions. When someone says, "You're making me feel bad about myself," the amateur hears a command to change their behavior. The strategic individual hears information about the other person's emotional management skills and self-esteem issues. The response: "That sounds difficult for you." No acceptance of responsibility for their feelings, no modification of behavior to manage their emotional state, just acknowledgement of their experience without ownership of their problem. This approach requires understanding the difference between empathy and emotional responsibility. Empathy is recognizing and acknowledging other people's emotional states. Emotional responsibility is accepting ownership of other people's emotional states. Empathy is healthy and necessary for human connection. Emotional responsibility is manipulation disguised as care. The manipulator thrives on blurring this distinction. They present their emotional states as your responsibility. "You made me feel this way. Your actions caused this. You're responsible for how I'm reacting." Each statement attempts to transfer ownership of their emotional experience to you. The strategic response maintains the distinction. "I can see that you're upset," acknowledges their emotional state without accepting ownership of it. "That must be difficult for you," shows empathy without taking responsibility. "I understand you feel strongly about this," validates their experience without changing your position. Machiavelli warned that the lion cannot protect himself from traps and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. Most people try to be either the lion using direct force and confrontation, or the fox, using cleverness and manipulation. Both approaches fail because they engage with manipulation on its own terms. The superior approach combines the strength of the lion with the cunning of the fox, but adds a third element: the strategic unavailability of the mountain. Mountains don't engage with storms, they simply exist, unchanging and unmovable, while the storm exhausts itself against their permanence. When someone attempts to manipulate you, you become the mountain. Not aggressive like the lion, not clever like the fox, just present, unmovable, and strategically unavailable for their manipulation. You acknowledge their storm without becoming part of it. You observe their chaos without absorbing it. You remain yourself while they exhaust their manipulative energy against your strategic indifference. This is the ultimate power move because it requires no effort to maintain. You're not fighting against their manipulation. You're not trying to out-manipulate them. You're simply refusing to participate in their emotional drama. And refusal to participate is the one response they have no counter for. In family dynamics, this approach becomes essential for survival. Family members often feel entitled to unlimited access to your emotional energy because of shared history and blood relationships. They use guilt, obligation, and emotional manipulation disguised as love and concern. When the family manipulator says, "You never call anymore, I guess we don't matter to you," they're using guilt to control your behavior. The amateur responds with guilt and overcompensation. "I'm sorry, I've been busy, but you're right, I should call more." This response rewards the manipulation and establishes a pattern where guilt controls your actions. The strategic response: "I call when I'm able to." No guilt, no overcompensation, no acceptance of their frame that not calling frequently equals not caring. Just a simple statement of fact that refuses to engage with their manipulation while remaining technically polite. The beauty of this approach is its adaptability. It works equally well with subtle manipulation and direct aggression. When someone tries to shame you, a real friend would, you respond with, "I can see we have different perspectives on friendship." When someone tries to obligate you, "After everything I've done for you," you respond with, "I appreciate what you've done." No acceptance of the implied debt. No agreement to modify your behavior based on past actions. The principle extends to digital manipulation. When someone posts content designed to make you feel guilty for your choices, success, or happiness, the amateur responds with justification or self-doubt. The strategic individual recognizes the manipulation and responds with strategic invisibility. No likes, no comments, no engagement, complete digital indifference. When they escalate by messaging you directly, "Did you see my post? I thought of you when I wrote it," your response, "I saw it." No elaboration, no engagement with the implied criticism, no acceptance of responsibility for their emotional state. Just acknowledgement without participation. This is where the philosophy becomes revolutionary. Most people believe that caring about someone means making yourself available for their emotional manipulation. They confuse love with emotional responsibility. They mistake empathy for obligation. They believe that setting boundaries means being cruel. But the opposite is true. Making yourself available for manipulation teaches people that manipulation works. Accepting responsibility for other people's emotions prevents them from developing their own emotional management skills. Failing to set boundaries enables destructive behavior patterns. The most loving thing you can do for a manipulator is to stop rewarding their manipulation. Not through punishment or aggression, but through strategic unavailability. You force them to develop healthier communication patterns by making manipulation ineffective. When someone realizes that their emotional manipulation doesn't work on you, they have two choices. They can escalate their manipulation until they reveal their true nature to everyone around them, or they can learn to communicate with you in healthier ways. either outcome serves your interests. The escalation phase is particularly revealing. When their usual manipulation tactics fail, they often increase the intensity dramatically. They might become openly aggressive, play victim more dramatically, or recruit others to pressure you on their behalf. This escalation serves as proof that their original behavior was manipulative rather than genuine communication. During this phase, your consistency becomes crucial. Every time you maintain your boundaries despite their escalation, you demonstrate that manipulation will not be rewarded, no matter how intense it becomes. This eventually teaches them that manipulation is not only ineffective, but actually counterproductive in their relationship with you. The recruitment phase is especially interesting from a strategic perspective. When individual manipulation fails, they often try to recruit allies. Everyone thinks you're being unreasonable. Your own family is worried about you. Even your friends have noticed you've changed. Each statement attempts to create social pressure that accomplishes what individual pressure could not. Your response remains consistent. That's interesting that you see it that way. No defense against the claimed group opinion, no explanation of your position, no attempt to recruit your own allies in response. Just acknowledgement followed by continued adherence to your boundaries. This response is devastating because it reveals that you're not afraid of social pressure. Most manipulation depends on the target's fear of social disapproval. When you demonstrate indifference to claimed group opinion, you remove one of their most powerful weapons. Machiavelli understood that since love and fear can hardly exist together if we must choose between them, it is far safer to be feared than loved. But the fear he advocated wasn't fear of your aggression. It was fear of your unpredictability. And nothing is more unpredictable to a manipulator than someone who simply cannot be moved by their usual tactics. The final stage of this transformation is the most profound. You begin to realize that your emotional energy is the most valuable resource you possess. It's finite, precious, and deserves to be invested wisely rather than stolen through manipulation. You become protective of your peace in the same way you would protect any valuable asset. This shift in perspective changes everything. Instead of seeing boundary setting as potentially cruel, you see it as essential self-preservation. Instead of viewing emotional detachment as cold, you recognize it as strategic. Instead of fearing other people's negative reactions to your boundaries, you welcome them as information about who deserves your continued investment. When someone responds to your healthy boundaries with anger, guilt-tripping, or manipulation, they're telling you everything you need to know about their character and intentions. They're revealing that they believe they're entitled to your emotional energy, regardless of the cost to your well-being. This revelation is a gift that allows you to adjust your expectations and investments accordingly. The transformation becomes complete when you realize that other people's comfort with your boundaries is not your responsibility. Some people will be upset when you stop allowing them unlimited access to your emotional energy. Some people will be angry when you stop accepting responsibility for their emotional states. Some people will feel abandoned when you stop prioritizing their needs above your own well-being. Their discomfort with your healthy boundaries is information about the nature of your previous relationship with them. If someone is angry that you've stopped allowing them to manipulate you, it reveals that manipulation was a significant component of their interaction style with you. If someone feels abandoned because you've started prioritizing your own well-being, it shows that they were accustomed to you sacrificing your well-being for their benefit. This knowledge is power because it allows you to make informed decisions about how much of your valuable emotional energy these people deserve going forward. You can choose to maintain relationships with people who respect your boundaries, while limiting or ending relationships with people who only valued you as a source of emotional supply. The ultimate realization is that you have always had this power. You've always had the right to refuse participation in other people's emotional manipulation. You've always had the authority to protect your own emotional well-being. You've always had the option to become strategically unavailable for drama, chaos, and manipulation. The only thing that has changed is your willingness to exercise this power. And once you begin exercising it consistently, you discover that most of the problems you thought were complex relationship issues were actually simple boundary violations that you had been enabling through your participation. You realize that emotional manipulation only works when both people participate in the manipulation. Remove your participation, and the entire dynamic collapses. The manipulator is left standing alone with their manipulation tactics, suddenly revealed as someone who has no actual power beyond your willingness to give it to them. This is when you understand the ultimate truth. They need you far more than you need them. Their power was always borrowed from your willingness to be controlled. Their significance was always dependent on your willingness to react. Their control was always an illusion that required your participation to maintain. When you withdraw your participation, you don't just free yourself from their manipulation. You reveal the fundamental weakness at the core of their entire approach to relationships. You expose them as someone who has never learned to connect with others through anything other than emotional manipulation and control. And that revelation transforms you from someone who can be controlled into someone who cannot be moved, not through cruelty or aggression, but through the simple recognition that your emotional energy belongs to you, and you have the absolute right to invest it wisely, rather than allow it to be stolen through manipulation. You become untouchable not because you lack empathy, but because you've learned to distinguish between empathy and exploitation. You become unmovable, not because you don't care, but because you've learned that caring about someone doesn't mean accepting responsibility for their emotional manipulation. You become dangerous to manipulators not because you attack them, but because you represent something they cannot control. A person who simply refuses to participate in their manipulation. And refusal to participate is the one response for which they have no counter, no strategy, and no solution. This is your power. This has always been your power. The only question is whether you're ready to use it.